Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another LaserPro webinar, the first one for 2024, which is really exciting. I trust you all had a good Christmas and New Year, so welcome back. So today's topic is what I like to refer to as LaserPro Foundations. We do also run this here in Australia. It is targeted at beginner level LaserPro use. So either beginners or brand new employees if you've maybe recently brought someone on board into the team. So if you've been using LaserPro for a long time, maybe some parts of today's content you may already know, or maybe slightly boring to you. But hopefully there's some little gold nuggets in there, or little tidbits that you can take out of today and take back to use in your business. So if you are a long-term user, bear with us. But if you are a beginner, hopefully you'll get a lot out of today. So I'll just share my screen and we'll jump into my demo system. As always, if you do have any questions throughout, please feel free to put them in the chat, and I'll try and allow some Q&A time at the end if you do want to come off mute if it is a slightly longer question. So what I've got at the moment is my main dashboard. So when you first log in, if you're a brand new user, this is probably what you're going to see or something similar. So with the dashboard, this is like your homepage. So it gives us a bit of a snapshot of what's going on within the LaserPro system without having to click or navigate anywhere else. So just to give you a bit of a breakdown of what's on this screen, in the top left-hand corner, we've got our system alerts, and it does break down what areas those alerts are coming from. So we've got 108 in stock, we've got quotes, if we had some for jobs or licenses or other system-related things, we would be able to see the breakdown for those as well. Now, this red section for alerts actually correlates to this red bell icon in the top right-hand corner. So if you think red and red, and they kind of tie together. The next one is this announcements bubble, and it is empty at the moment, but this is if Laser wanted to send to all the members any specific announcements, they can do that, but it doesn't look like it's utilized at this time. Reminders, so because I have a demo system and it hasn't got as much data as your live systems, if there were reminders for specific jobs or things like that that are coming up based on due dates or the like, that would show up here. And then in this bottom section, we've got what's on today. So it's looking at the schedule and showing us on a map the sites or where the technicians are if they're using the mobile app based on the geo stamps. And then we've got the current activity or today's schedule, and it's giving us a breakdown of not just the technician, but what time are they scheduled, what's that job status, what's the customer, and what's the site. So we can kind of see a bit of a very clear snapshot of what's current and what's going on today without having to go anywhere else, which is helpful. Beyond the dashboard, we've got our main navigational menu on the left. So we've got this blue menu and it's got all of our different icons down the left-hand side. Now, if we hover over them, it does pop out and then we can navigate if we need to. If you are newer to the system and maybe you're not as familiar with the icons yet, you can also pop out the blue menu down the bottom here to see the names if you'd like. It comes down to personal preference, but over time, hopefully you'll get more familiar with which icon lists which areas. And then the other thing we have on the navigation is our main search menu at the top here. So this is what I like to refer to as the global search, because it will look at everything in the system, all the different record types based on what you're entering. So as an example, I created a customer earlier called 123 Dental. So if I start searching that, it's now going to give me the different segments of the system. So customers, sites, jobs, invoices, and anything that relates to that. Now, if it is a more long-term customer and maybe there's lots of sites or jobs that relate to that customer, it does limit it to 10 records at a time in that drop down there. So if you did want to see more, because maybe you haven't found exactly what you're looking for, if you do hit enter or the search icon next to it, it gets the same end result. It brings us to the search results page, and then we can see the more detailed breakdown of all of the different results or the different categories that it might be applied to. So sometimes if I'm not sure what I'm looking for, I find this is helpful because it's so widespread in what it's looking at, and then I can kind of figure out and then work back down into where I need to go. If I do know exactly what I need, then I sometimes use this to navigate as well, just to click straight into, say, the customer card, if that's what I'm looking for. So a few different ways to navigate and search depending on what the situation is. But from here, we're going to go through some of the different icons on the left. So the first one is the people icon. So if we hover over this, within the people area, we've got our customers, our sites that sit against the customers, suppliers, contacts. So contacts is actually a single global database of contacts now. So it was a change that Simpro brought in the last probably a couple of years ago now, but rather than having to, say, duplicate customers if they need to be against multiple customer cards or sites, depending on how you need to set things up, we can just create them once and then link them to multiple records. So that's a great feature improvement that Simpro's brought in, and we can go through that in a minute. And then we've got our employees and our subcontractors in terms of your business. So the first thing I'm going to go into is our customers. Now, if you do just want to see your entire customer base, you can come to this screen and you can search or just click in and navigate what you need to do. Now, what I want to do today is if I click into my example customer card, is go through some of the fields in here. And this may seem quite basic in terms of a company name is a company name, but I guess want to go through a bit more of the setup behind a customer card and ways that that can benefit your business moving forward if we can set up some certain settings to then have flow-on effects when you're raising quotes, jobs, and invoices later. So if we come to this first profile tab and detail sub-tab, we've got in here the company name. If it was a, say, domestic customer and we wanted to change it to individual, we can. What that's going to do is remove the GST and company name and bring up first name, last name. So slightly different fields depending on which toggle you select up the top here. But beyond that, hopefully the name, the email, the phone, the address is fairly self-explanatory and straightforward. What I want to go through now is some of these other sub-tabs within profile. So if I come into contacts, this is what I was referring to earlier in that Simpro now has the single database of contacts. So if this person already exists, then I can just start searching their name and then link them to the second customer card. So do I exist? No, we will use Sandy. So I can just search their name regardless of if they're already in this customer or not. And then I can link them to another one. So very handy. We want to avoid duplication if we can. So this is ideal for that type of use. If we do want to create a new contact, we can on the right-hand side using the Create Contact button. Once we click this open, or in any contact actually, we've got the contact information at the top, but we do have these tick boxes here for contact for, and then a few different areas, quote, job, invoice, and statement. So this is really handy if you do, say, have a different email or person that you need to address things to, depending on what the type of record is. So say all quotes need to go to a project manager, but all of the invoices and statements need to go to an accounts person or an accounts email address. So we could set them up as different contacts and then in here tick these boxes for, as an example, if it was an accounts email, make one up. And that way, every time I raise a invoice or statement moving forward, it's automatically going to pick up this email address and address it to this person as opposed to maybe a more generic one. And then we would have to change it manually. So just little snippets that can make our lives easier a little bit down the line. We'll save that while we're here. The next one is custom. So if you do have any custom fields set up for customers specifically, this is dependent on your specific LaserPro system, what you've done with the setup. So yours may look slightly different to other members, and it may look slightly different to what mine looks like right now. This is going to come down to your specific LaserPro. But if you did have any set up, this is where they would be, especially if they're mandatory. the system's going to force you to fill it out before you can proceed with creating a new customer. If we come into response times, I don't see this very widely used, but it is a really great feature. If you do have specific SLAs or response times that you need to adhere to for your customer, whether it's on a contract or not, so we can set up response times so we can record that. Say it's a 24-hour response time or SLA. Once the job, say, enters the system, this system's going to start a timer for you. And then we can report on that later. So great feature, but maybe not as commonly used as it could be. The settings tab. Now this is the big one that I really wanted to go through. If we come in here, we've got quite a few different drop downs and etc. So what's really good about this tab is there's a lot of set and forget in a way, that we can set some things once and then the system's going to continually remember that for later on. So we've got a few different drop downs here for customer profile and customer group. Now, this is something that's LaserPro specific as well to yours. So this is all determined from the system setup, whether you have these or not. But where I've seen these really greatly used is recording things like the customer industry or maybe a marketing source. How did we get that customer? Some just metrics that I guess that we can record against the customer once, and then we can use this to report on later. So they are filters that we can then, if we're looking at other reports in the system, we can break things down further. So some people use them, some people don't, but if that is something that you wanted to delve into, whether that's some of the examples I listed or other ones, it's up to you. We just need to set them up accordingly to have them appear in the drop-down. We've got an account manager field if we do have anyone listed in the employee card as that. The one underneath here, service job cost center. So if we do a lot of repeat work for a certain customer, we can set up a cost center in their settings. So that way, every time we raise a new service job, it's automatically going to default to this cost center, depending on what our cost center setup is like. So as an example, I'm going to select commercial maintenance and servicing. And that way, every time I raise a job now for Auckland Zoo, it's automatically going to link this cost center. We can always change it if we need to, but it's not an extra step that we have to think about. The system's going to automatically apply it. We've got our preferred notification method. So if we do have, say, SMS added into the system, that is an add-on. It isn't included in standard LaserPro, but if you did have SMS, we could set up what's their preferred notification method, whether that's email, SMS, or both, or whether potentially we don't want to send them any notifications at all, depending on the scenario with the customer. So we can set that up here, so that way we're not going to potentially upset any customers if they don't want to be notified. And we've got over here these form template defaults. So when we're in a quote, job, invoice, etc., we've got in our forms tab lots of different templates to choose from to determine the layout of what we're going to send them. If there are customers that have very specific requirements of what they want to see in terms of those forms, we can come in here and click configure defaults, and this pop-up will appear and we can click through and say that, say for an invoice, for a tax invoice, this customer only wants to see descriptions. They don't care for the itemized. They don't want to see the breakdown. They just want to see the job scope of works and then the total price. Similar for all the other invoice types, progress claims, etc. And we can click through into the different tabs and do similar things for quotes and jobs. Again, it's something little, but next time you go to now raise one of these forms, we're not going to have to click into the drop down and find the applicable template, and it takes out some of that human element where we can set this once and the system's going to pick this up every time and go straight to that form type for you. So that is very helpful, and I will set one up in here as well. We will use a online acceptance one. So because I've just changed that, it doesn't actually, once we get out of the pop-up window, it doesn't show me the changes, so to speak. We can't see it from this page. So I'm just going to quickly hit save to make sure that that applies. If we come further down, there's some banking areas. I don't see the account name, bank code, account number fields in BPay used very often. A lot of that information would typically be stored in your accounting package. However, the thing that I do see used quite often is this payment terms field on the right. So in the last SimPro update or LaserPro update, they brought out an additional feature to create your own payment terms. So previous to that, all of the payment terms were determined by SimPro, COD, 7 days, 14, 21, etc., etc. We do have the ability now to create our own if you do want to create some unique payment terms for certain customers. But what we can do here is rather than just having a, say, system default, we can change it at the customer level. So that way, if I say change it to the standard is 7 days, if there's a specific customer that we have an agreement with to make it say 14 days, 28 days, etc., I can change it here. And once I now raise an invoice, it's automatically going to update the due date and the payment terms for me. And it's just an extra step that your team doesn't have to remember to change during the invoicing process. So that's a big one. Very customer specific though, if you do kind of have your norm payment terms, and then you may only want to change it for a handful of customers. Additionally, if we're talking about invoicing credit limit, it's probably something that I don't see as commonly used as it could be, but this is a really great feature as well, especially if you maybe have a slightly larger team. The system's going to alert your team to let them know that maybe someone's reached their credit limit without having to, keep track of it or have conversations and things get forgotten. So if we put in the credit limit fields, I'm just going to put in, say, $10,000. It's a text field. You can put in whatever number you'd like. But if I hit save on this, if it got to the point where the customer had reached their credit limit based on invoices being generated, when someone goes to raise the next job, a banner is going to appear on the job creation page saying that this customer's credit limit is this, and they're now sitting at this. Now, it doesn't necessarily stop them from creating a new job. It just alerts them. And I guess that can prompt a conversation of, should we be doing this work for this customer if it's new work in addition to what's in the credit limit already? If you do get to the decision of, no, we don't want to do any work, we're going to hold until they can settle some of that payment, then I would be using this on stop button next to it. So if I hit on stop, what it's going to do is that banner will appear saying that they've reached their credit limit, but on stop's going to say, you can't create a new job for them. You need to contact your administrator. So this is a great feature and a great tool that if you do have different people working in the business, we could turn this on even temporarily until they settle some payment. And then we could come back in and untick it. So that way we can now raise new quotes and jobs for them again. If you do have unstop turned on, it doesn't stop you from finishing out the jobs that you've already got raised. It just stops anyone in the team raising brand new quotes and jobs. So just a bit of a fine line there, but that is a great feature if you need it. In addition, we've got our tags subtab. So this is similar to the customer groups and customer profiles in the settings subtab. It is a reporting metric essentially. So we can come in here and we can tag whether that's a marketing source or anything of the like. We would set up these options in the system setup as well. But once we've got them set up, we can apply them here. So we can just click on them and that way we can report on them later down the line if we did want to track any marketing sources or marketing efforts in terms of ROI. On the end here, we've got our preferred technician. So this is helpful if maybe you have a technician, or I take that back, not a technician. If you have a customer that needs a very certain type of work done, and maybe there's only certain people in your team that are qualified, if they do need an extra certification or something like that, we could set it up here so that way when we go to schedule for those jobs, the system is going to give us a prompt to say this is the preferred technician. And we can schedule them if they're available. And then if they're not, we could select multiple preferred technicians and work our way down the list. So it's helpful in the kind of nuanced scenario where it's a specific type of work, or maybe this customer just really likes a certain technician. They think they do a good job, they give them compliments, and they say, yeah, I'd really like them back. It's just a little feature that we can use to, try and send them back next time if they're free, schedule permitting. If they're not, we can just work our way down the list. So I'm going to add a second one for when we get to scheduling later on. If we come back to the top row, we've now got a few other customer specific settings. So in our rates tab, we've got a few different sub tabs here. So we've got our general, which has our service fee. So there are generic service fees in terms of the system setup, but if we did want to change it for a specific customer, we can. So if there was, say, something that you'd set up that's customer specific, if you do maybe have a contract or something like that, and it's just how we've been able to set it up, we can change that here. So it'll override the system default service fee for this customer only. If we come into a labor, pardon me, this is a really important one that I don't see people use again as often as they could. So if you do say have customer specific labor rates, you've got your standard rate, and I'm just going to make up some figures here of say $100 an hour, and for whatever reason for this customer you've agreed that you're actually going to charge out 90 because they're a good customer, you do a lot of work for them, whatever that might be. I see a lot of members use the labor rates to then create some customer specific labor rates. So they create separate ones. Now you can do that, and I guess it works, but we're also just creating extra, fields in the system. What you can do is come into the customer card specifically and come into our rates and labor, and we can override the sell rate at the customer level without having to create any additional labor rates or fields. So say this says 75, if I wanted to change it to say 65, I can do that within the customer card. I hit save, and next time I go to raise a quote or a job for this customer and use the labor rate, it's going to apply this revised rate for me. So it can be helpful for that if you maybe want to charge more or less for a specific customer. We can come in here and adjust it if we need to. You can do it the other way as well and create customer specific labor rates, but it just kind of creates extra fields and extra work if maybe we don't need to. I'm sure there'll probably be a question about that later, so we'll come back to that. I will keep going into my materials subtab. So in here is where we can apply additional pricing tiers. So this is determined by the system setup as well. But if we do have different pricing tiers set up for different material markups, especially if maybe you say have scaled pricing enabled on a specific pricing tier, we can adjust this here. So it is very kind of set and forget, similar to some of these other fields, in that we set it here once and that the system's going to pick up that each quote and job invoice moving forward and apply the specific markup based on the items that we've populated. So we can adjust it if we need to. Contracts and prepaid time, I'm not going to go into them right now. They're probably a bit more advanced for this session, but we can come back to that in another session if we need to. If we come into sites, we can have as many sites linked to a customer as we need to. We can have 1, we can have 100. It's completely up to you. But we can come in here, and while I'm here actually, we're going to click into this one. So once we come into a site pop-up, whether you go through this navigational way or through the sites in the people icon, we've got our address, that's okay. We've got our primary contact for the site over here. So this differs to the contacts tab that we were looking at earlier under the profile tab. So this is a site specific primary contact. So say it's the Auckland Zoo, there might be, a head office or administration type, but maybe this is someone in a zoo scenario. Maybe it's the head of a specific department. They've probably got little sub areas of animals. Maybe it's people to do with that. So in here, we can create new contacts if we need to. But because we have that single database of contacts that I was talking about earlier, if they do happen to already exist, we can search them in the contacts tab as well. So it just depends whether they're brand new or whether they already exist. But we can set them up. We've got our preferred technician at the site level as well. So depending on your customer scenario, you can set the preferred technician at the customer level. Maybe that might be better for a domestic type scenario. If it is a more commercial or industrial customer, maybe you want to put a preferred technician at the site level. So we can do that here as well. And the top row, we've got our customer assets. So that's only if you use assets, probably a bit advanced for the session, so we will skip over that. Which customers the site is linked to. So there are certain scenarios where maybe the site would be linked to multiple customers, depending on if it's a contracted site and maybe the contract has changed over the years. There could be scenarios where that happens, but we can add additional customers into the site if we need to. History, so all of the history pertaining to this specific site. So once we get out of this pop-up, there is a history tab on the customer card as well, but that's going to look at everything, especially if there are multiple sites, where this is going to narrow it down to just this specific location. Attachments. So if you do have any site-specific attachments, we can put them here, whether that's a photo, a map of the site, anything like that. Anything that the technicians need to see potentially from the mobile app when they're going to jobs, that's going to be helpful when they get to the location. Notes. So similar to what I was just talking about, if there are certain information that the technicians need to know when they get to site, whether that's you need a gate code to access the premise, or it's a school and you need a friendly reminder to report to the office to check in when you get there. Anything like that that we need to tell the technicians on a regular basis, we can come in here and put it in the site notes, and that way they can see that from the mobile app. So it is a set and forget. We can set it once, and maybe then we don't need to copy and paste it or enter it into the job description every time, because they'll be able to see that within the notes tab of their mobile app. So if I save and finish out of that, and we'll come back to our customer card, we've got our history tab, and it's got all of the sub-tabs for the different record types, and then within the record types, the different stages. When we get to the quote and the job, I'll come back to stages and explain that a little bit more. Attachments. So if you do want to upload attachments pertaining to a specific customer, whether that's a copy of a contract document, photos, anything of the like, we can do that here. We can create folders to keep them, keep it tidy. So we can come in here and create a folder structure, which is helpful. With the attachments, once you've uploaded an attachment, we do have this public column on the right-hand side. So depending on a few different settings, is going to determine who can then see that attachment. So as an example, if you mark it as public, and depending on your mobile security groups that you've given your technicians, they may or may not be able to see that attachment. So if there are things that maybe you don't want the entire team to see because it is a contract or a more sensitive document, we can untick it as public, but something to be mindful of is check your mobile security groups, because there is a tick box to allow technicians to see private attachments as well. So it's just going to come down to your system and your settings as to whether that actually plays out how we want it to. The other thing to note is if you do give any of your customers access to the customer portal to your LaserPro, if it is ticked as public, they will be able to see that document or attachment in the customer portal. So that's only if you're using that, but just some food for thought. If we come into notes, so these are customer-specific notes. So this will auto-populate with certain events in the system. So if we're emailing out copies of invoices or statements, that will auto-populate here with the date, the time, etc., what we've emailed them. But if you do want to come in here and create notes manually, you can. So I find this really helpful. Say I've had a conversation with a customer today about an overdue invoice or something like that. We can come in here and put in the subject and what we've spoken about. And the reason that I like this is if I just put test, pardon me, and hit save, it date and time stamps it. And we do have the option also to put a follow-up date. So say they said, okay, I'm going to pay it at the end of the month. I could then put a follow-up date for say next week. And that way, because I've put a follow-up date, it's going to give me a system alert to remind me that that note is due, and just another prompt to be able to follow it up. So I do like it for date and timestamps, just to record when conversations or when things have happened. The logs. So the logs have gotten a bit of an overhaul in the last, I want to say 12 to 18 months, which is really great because now it gives us a lot more detail in terms of what's happened or what's changed. So as I've gone through and made all of those changes as I've clicked through the different tabs, it's date and time stamped the fact that I've made those changes or my logins made those changes and what I've actually done. So it showed that I've updated the labor rate from 70, it was 75 to 65, where before we wouldn't have that level of information. Someone would have changed it, but it wouldn't have told us who, when, what, etc. So this can be helpful. Whereas in the past, where a certain setting has been changed and no one can figure out why or who's done it, to have that conversation of why or reverting it if it maybe wasn't meant to happen. So if you ever are unsure around why something's changed, whether that's contact information, email address, etc., the first place I generally look my investigation is a logs tab, and that way I can try and backtrack and figure out who or why that's happened. Customer segmentation. So this is a LaserPro specific feature. So it does have some pre-inbuilt industries, and once we select one, sub-industries type. So we can use this as a reporting mechanism as well. So we do have the option to create our own, but if you do want to use the predefined ones in here, you can do that as well. Great. So now that we've gone through a customer card and a site card, what we're going to do next is come into our employees. So if I come into an employee, some of this may be fairly self-explanatory. Name, position, street address, contact information. What's really important is the settings tab, the schedule tab, and the rates tab, especially if it's a technician, those three. So in the settings tab, we can set up their username and password if we're giving them access to either the desktop LaserPro like we're looking at now, or the mobile app. We do need to come in here and set up a username and password. It is case sensitive, so whatever you put in, just be mindful of. And then on the right-hand side, in our licenses area, we can determine what areas of the system we're giving this employee access to and what level of permissions we're assigning to that. So user is the desktop that we're looking at now, and then we've got security groups. Mobility is the mobile app. Connect is still there as an option. I wouldn't recommend ticking it. You can't download it from the App Store now anyway, so if you see it, just we'll pretend it doesn't exist. So we can sub-tick the mobile and then give them a mobile security group as well if it is a technician out in the field. Just while I'm here, if we're talking about these settings, the profile type. So if you do have someone say that's you want to list as a salesperson or a project manager on a quote or a job, you do need to tick these boxes here for them to show up in the drop down. If you don't tick them, then you won't be able to see them and select them in those fields. If we come into the schedule subtab, this one's really important. So if you're creating a new staff member in the business and they're a technician and we want to be able to assign them to jobs, we do need to assign cost centers to them. So sometimes I get questions from Australian members I've set up a new employee, I'm trying to schedule them to a job, they're not showing up. I just can't see them. The first place I look is this schedule tab in the employee card, because if they're not linked to a cost center, then when we've raised that quote or job against that cost center, it's just not marrying up and they're not going to show up. So they do need to be linked to it. So if I click into the blue area of the box, and if nothing shows up in the drop down, it just says add all. That tells me that all the cost centers have been assigned and there's no unassigned ones or pending ones to add. So if I clear all, so if I come in here, we can add all. So depending on how long your cost center list is, I've seen some pretty long cost center lists, you don't have to add them one by one, which is helpful. If you do have other features set up like zones or teams, there would be subsequent areas below cost centers to assign them to zones or teams as well. That is dependent on your setup, whether you have those additional fields created. But if you do use those, then teams and zones could also be applicable why they're not showing up in a certain scheduling scenario. Licenses. So some members use this, some don't that I've seen. But if you did want to record employee-specific licenses, so whether that's a driver's license, an electrical license, anything to do with work, essentially, we can click Add License and we can put in the license name, the license number, the expiry date. So this can be really helpful. So let's say I put in an alert for next week. The system's going to alert us by default 7 days, but we can change it if we need to weeks, months, years, etc. So the system's going to give us an alert in the bell icon when this is coming up to be due. Also, if they do have mobile app access, the technician will get a banner in their mobile app as well, saying that their license is coming up for due, and then maybe that will prompt them to give you the new information once it's been renewed, if it does renew. Now, there's this critical tick box below the license information. Now, if you tick this and this date lapses, so if I get to the 31st of January and I haven't gone in and updated the expiry date, I'm no longer going to be able to schedule this technician. So this can be helpful if it is a critical license, essentially, that if that license isn't valid, this technician should not be on site. They should not be physically doing work if this license isn't valid. So this can be helpful, but just be mindful that it is good, it has its purpose, but you won't be able to schedule them to any new jobs after this date if that's the case. You'll have to come in here and adjust the date or unmark it as critical, or the system will just stop you. And we can upload attachments for the licenses. So if we want to upload a photo or anything like that for record purposes. Emergency, if you do want to record emergency contact information, I do know that a lot of members in Australia anyway put the emergency contact information in something like Xero as well, I guess to do with payroll and whatnot. Now, not everyone maybe has access to Xero in a member's business, so it might be helpful to put it in LaserPro as well, only because if there is ever an accident and someone doesn't have access to Xero to then contact their emergency contact, they can just access the information a bit more readily if they need to. If we come up to the rates tab now, this is very important for technicians out in the field. So if we're scheduling technicians to jobs, the actual cost for labor on a job is going to be populated based on these fields here. So if you haven't input a pay rate, employment cost, or overhead for a new staff member or even existing staff members, and you're scheduling them onto jobs, if we're looking at the profit and loss of a job, it's not going to start doing the maths and giving us an accurate P&L breakdown if there's no figures here, because there's no cost to attribute based on this technician's time. So I do recommend filling these in and keeping them updated as much as possible. So there are certain spreadsheets and calculators to help you figure out what some of these costs are. Maybe we can have a separate session on that another time, because there is a bit to it. But if you do have some of those figures that you've already calculated previously, please try and put them in here. Attachments, if we do want to upload any kind of employee-related attachments, whether that's a copy of their employment contract or anything like that. Plant only if you use it, but if you do use plant and equipment under utilities in LaserPro and you do have items checked out to an employee, this can be helpful to see what equipment they have, especially if maybe an employee, if you do use this feature, if an employee has, say, resigned, we then have a full list of the equipment that we need to get back from this employee. So maybe depending on how complex your plant setup is, maybe they have like a phone, a vehicle, certain tools, but we kind of have that full list to say, okay, we need X, Y, Z to be returned. I was just reading your comment, Hannah. That's fine. We will add that to the list for a future webinar topic. Notes, so employee-specific notes. I have seen this used in some different ways. So I have seen someone use this in a more HR type approach, I guess. So they were putting a certain employee on a, giving them a verbal warning. So when they'd had that discussion, they came in here and put in a note. So that way, again, it date and time stamped it and we had a record. So that way, I guess if things eventuated or got worse, they had a full history, I guess, of what the conversation was, when it happened, etc. So I have used it seen in that kind of sense, but yeah, maybe like you've done a performance review. If you do have a separate HR system for that, that's okay. But maybe if you don't have something like that, this could be something a bit more basic that you could use just to record some of those conversations. And logs, so similar to the customer log, this is quite detailed as well. I find this really helpful when I'm looking through members' systems to see when they last updated some of their employee costs. So those costs in the rates tab that we just looked at. So if you haven't updated your employee costs in, say, 6 to 12 months, the likelihood of that being accurate at this point in time is slim. As much as there is a figure there, if an employee got a pay rise, even if it's a couple of dollars an hour, that all adds up. So it might have been reflected in zero for payroll, but has that been reflected in their employee card for your job costings? Things like that. So if I did update the rates costs, so I'll come back in here and just change that quickly and hit save. So, oh, Siri's trying to talk to me. That's lovely. I did hit save. Oh, it has changed it. It just put it in a different, I was looking at the top. So if you do update the pay rates, we can come in here and see maybe when they were last updated. I find it helpful anyway. So we can see here who's changed it and what they've changed it to. So if I get out of that employee card, so contractor card looks pretty similar from a visual perspective. The only difference in a contractor card is we've got contractor company name and then contractor contact name. So if we say had ABC contractor and then the actual person's name is, say, John, we can put that in here, but all of the other tabs and sub-tabs look exactly the same. So there's not too much difference there in terms of inputting the information. So if I get out of that now, the contractors, we're going to come into quotes. So I'm just going to create a service quote today, but I will give you a bit of a context or overview of the difference between service and project quotes. So I think it's a bit confusing in terms of the terminology. So I guess in terms of trade businesses, you think service project in terms of the type of work that you do. That's not necessarily going to be exactly the same in terms of service or project quotes in terms of LaserPro. So a service quote allows you to create a quote with a single cost center. Now, a cost center is, the easiest way to describe it is like a revenue stream or a type of work that you do, the services that you offer. And then that links on to Xero in terms of finances. So in a service quote, you can create one cost center to then put in your parts and labor. So it doesn't give you the option to, I guess, kind of break it down or tailor it if you need to kind of section it out or segment it, where a project quote allows you to have sections and then multiple cost centers within each section. So if you are doing a large, say, commercial project or a tender or something like that, and you do need to break it down based on the plans into different stages or things like that, a project quote would probably be more applicable in that sense. So the terminology just isn't exact between, I find that depending on how you need to present the quote or the job, depends on which one I would select. But if I click into service quote, it comes up with this screen where we can input some of the initial information to do with our quote. So I'm going to use my Auckland Zoo example. Select a site. Now, if the customer or the site doesn't already exist, you can create new records for those within this screen, especially if maybe you're getting a phone call inquiry or something like that, or a phone request for a job. You can just do it from this screen, but we won't in this specific scenario. So I'm just going to say that this is a plumbing example. I've got commercial maintenance. So because I'd already preset my cost center in the customer card earlier, it's now pre-populated this for me. If I didn't have that selected, then I'd have to manually click into the drop down and select one because it is a mandatory field, which is why it has the asterisk next to it, because we do need it to proceed. If we keep coming further down, we can put in any primary contacts, site contacts, additional contacts if we need to. If we do need to put an order number for any reason, whether that's at the quote level or the job level, if the customer's giving you a PO number, we can insert it here. Due date is turned on to be mandatory in this specific system, but it doesn't have to be. That's dependent on your system settings. But because it's mandatory, I'm going to fill it out. The salesperson and project manager fields that we were talking about earlier, so depending on whether they're selected in the employee cards, determines what's in that dropdown. And then because I set up that preferred technician field, it's now pre-populated me into the technicians field as well. So now that, one more field before I hit next, I'm getting ahead of myself. We've got the quote description down the bottom here. Now you can do it at this screen or when we hit next, but while we're here, you can either just type a description of, say it was a phone inquiry and they're requesting a quote, what they're after, or if we do have scripts set up, we can insert them here as well. So it looks like we do have one set up, which is helpful. So now if I come back up and hit next, it brings us into our quote. Now, a hot tip, at this point, if I logged out of the system or I just got distracted and came back, my quote doesn't actually exist yet. Until I see a number in this top left-hand corner, if I got out of it for any reason, it's not going to have saved it, and I'm going to have to recreate it. So my general rule, for me personally anyway, is as soon as I get to the screen, I just do a quick save, and when it generates the number for me, I know that this quote record now exists and I'm not going to have to recreate it. I have learnt that out of many times of having to recreate things. But once we're in here, we've got our quote description that we were just looking at. We've got private notes. So if you want something that the customer is never going to see, regardless of what form we pull or whether they use the customer portal or anything like that, these are fully private notes if you do need to record something. But if you do put anything in the job description that maybe you don't want the customer to see, I wouldn't recommend it. We've got our job breakdown here in terms of the pricing. So if I come into now my parts and labor tab, I refer to this as almost like our shopping cart. This is where we're going to price everything, whether it's parts or labor, for our quote or our job. It uses the same tab. So if I come in here, the sundries was the default service fee, which is why it's auto-populated it, and the labor was the default labor rate, so it's added that as well. So depending on those defaults in the customer card, they may come up with slightly different things. But if we now come into, say, our catalog sub-tab, this is where we can see all of our materials that we've got in the system, and we can go through, and if you know what you're looking for, you could search for it. But if you're not sure what you're looking for, we can then click through the different groups and subgroups, the folder structure, to come in and find our items. We can either click into the click into the box next to the item. It will auto-populate a 1 as the quantity. We can override it if we need to, and then you can either hit enter or you can hit add items just above it. It does the same thing. But once I do this, a little pop-up is going to display in the very middle of the screen, confirming that the items have now been added. And then if you do need to just kind of go on to the next item and go on to the next item, you know that it's been done. But if I come back to my billable tab now as the example, it's now populated that item for me. And I'm just going to populate some time on this. And it's now pricing up my quote for me accordingly. So in here, we've got our takeoff templates, our pre-builds, and our catalog as our subtabs. So generally, you would price using those things. I do see on occasion members use the one-off items or to add extra costs into their quote or job. Now, one-off items, they're generally either used more than they should be or not enough. There's not much middle ground. If you create a one-off item, it is quite literal in the term of one-off item. It's going to add it to this quote or job only. It's not going to add it for future use into our catalog or pre-builds or anything like that. So if you're creating it now and you think you're going to have to create this again in the future, even if it's something that you only occasionally use, I do think it's worth then investing that time to just create it as a pre-build or a catalog item. So that way it's there for future use. Because I do see people often create a one-off item and then next week or next month, they have to create the same thing again and again. So I think it's a bit of a ROI on your time. If it is something that is very niche and you don't think you're ever going to use it again, then maybe creating a one-off item is going to be beneficial, if we're talking about parts anyway. Where one-off items could be also beneficial is if you do want to change the toggle to labor, if maybe you wanted to input a subcontractor cost for a specific reason, maybe you needed to hire a specific piece of equipment or machinery, and it's not something that's in the norm, then we could use it for that as well. So depending on which toggle you use is going to attribute that cost into that area of the P&L breakdown. Now, if it is a one-off item, a genuine one-off item, and we don't need to add it to our pre-built or catalog, if you do want to raise a purchase order for it, you are going to have to tick the inventory tick box. So if you don't tick this, you're not going to be able to raise a PO through the system for that one-off item. So just something to keep in mind. If I come out of here, so we've now priced our quote. Very basic pricing, but we'll go with it. The next thing that I want to show you is scheduling. So within our schedule tab of a quote or a job, it does give us all the available resources. So a couple of different ways you can schedule in the system, and this is one way. I will show you another way once we get out of the quote. But if I come in here, because I listed myself as the preferred technician, that's why my name is now in yellow. And if I hover over it, it says preferred technician number 1. So if I had listed multiple preferred technicians, it's going to have multiple people in yellow. It's going to say 1, 2, 3, depending on what order we've put it in. So that is, I guess, how that can come into play and be helpful once we get to this stage. Now, because I went back and added the cost centers, if a person doesn't show up here, that's linking back to that cost center scenario I was talking about. But if we now want to schedule, say, myself onto this quote, I can click the calendar and the arrow icon next to that person, and a pop-up will appear, and I can, today is the 25th, and then I can go into the date and time that I want, and then I can click and drag. Now, these 15-minute increments are quite small on this screen, I will admit, and I do often get the timing slightly off. So say I actually wanted it to be 7 o'clock, I can then click and drag on the block that I've already created and click and drag it down. Or if I made it too long, I can move it back up. So it is quite user-friendly to adjust if you need to, or say I put it on the wrong day, say it was actually meant to be tomorrow, I can click and drag it between the days as well. So it is quite easy to amend, but once we've scheduled it accordingly and it's where we want, if I click the X out of the pop-up window and come back into my quote, it has now scheduled me, and I'm just going to quickly hit save. So it's now scheduled me to this quote for today. The other thing that in this screen that I think a lot of people overlook is this help me decide button. I don't see this as widely used as it could be either, and it's actually really helpful. So if I click the help me decide button instead, this pop-up appears, and based on the labor that I put on the job, so the 1.5 hours, it's filled in my job duration for me. Now you can override the figure here if you need to for any reason. So, pardon me, I wanted to change it to 2. We could. But what this is going to do is it's going to go now look at all of the other technician schedules, and the system's going to tell me who's available, as opposed to me having to look through everyone and figure out who's free and, okay, yep, Johnny's free, we're going to schedule him. The system's going to do some of that legwork for us, and then it's going to break it down into AM and PM on each date and tell me how many staff are available. So at the moment, I only have 1 because that's what's coming up. But it could give you 2, 5, 10, depending on your team and depending on their schedules. So if I clicked into, say, AM for today, underneath it now says technicians to schedule, and it's going to give us a list of those technicians based on who's appeared in this number. And what it's going to do is it's going to calculate the travel distance if we've got a few things. If there's nothing scheduled for the day, if it's the first job of the day, what it's going to do is calculate the distance from the address in their employee card to the site. Now, Bob Plummer doesn't have an address in his employee card, so it's not calculating anything. But if there was another job scheduled, so say it wasn't the first job of the day, it's going to look at the job or quote or whatever scheduled previously. It's going to look at the address for that record previously and calculate the distance from that site to this site. So it can be really helpful in that sense, especially if we're trying to take into account who's closest, like who's already in that area, things like that. And so it can be really good. And then once we've calculated distance, if that's something that we want to do, or reviewed who else is in this list, if there were multiple, we can put in the start time, finish time. We can amend it if we wanted to. So say I actually want it to be 10:30 to 12:30, hit select, and it's now scheduled Bob Plummer for this quote. So if I get out of this pop-up, it's now additionally scheduled this person. So I do see a lot of people have, say, 2 screens open, one with the quote or the job or whatever they're scheduling, and then a second screen with, say, the one of the schedule views, so the day view, the week view, month view, whatever you prefer, and they kind of do the schedule that way, so they could do some of that analysis and see who's free on this date at this time. So this help me decide button, as much as that way works, and some people prefer that, they dislike the human element of it. The system can do some of that analysis for you if we take advantage of the help me decide button. A lot of people overlook it. It's a button. They look at this screen every day and they just don't know what they don't know and they don't click into it. So next time you're scheduling, I recommend just click it open, whether you use it or not. Just have a look at it and see whether that's going to be something that works for you. So if I come back to my details tab now that we've scheduled the quote. So in this scenario, we're going to pretend that we've created a quote, we've gone out to site and done a site visit, we've now priced it, and we want to send a copy of the quote now off to the customer. So if I come into my form subtab, because of that customer form template that I set up earlier, it's automatically picked up this online acceptance service quote description form. That wasn't there earlier, so it's now automatically picked that up. It's picked up that we need to send the quote to whoever the primary contact is, and we've got some automated fields down the bottom. So anything that's in a square brackets is an automated field. We don't need to fill it in. It's going to auto-populate that information once I hit send. So now I'm going to send that off, and that's going to send to myself. Perfect. And now because I have sent it off, I've emailed it, what it's done is it's updated my quote status at the top here. So the colored status that we had our previous webinar on, status codes and automatic triggers, it's now updated that accordingly because I've done that certain action. So now that I've finished that off, we're going to jump one more step ahead. Let's pretend that the customer's come back and accepted the quote. I'm going to hit save and finish. And I can hit convert to. Now, there are different ways of doing this as well. If you were, say, in the quotes list, you can go options on the quote and convert, and it does the same thing. But if I'm already in the quote, I find this easier. Just depends on how you like to navigate or what you're looking at the time. But if I hit convert to job, it's going to ask for a confirmation. And now I have my job has now been populated based on all of the information from the quote that I just created. So similar to the quote layout, we've got our sub-tabs here and then the top row. So it looks very similar in terms of quote or job. I can definitely tell that it has converted and changed records because it does say service job in the top left-hand corner. So if you're ever not sure, just have a quick look. But in terms of the job itself, the schedule looks exactly the same. So if we're talking about scheduling, hit save and finish. I'm just going to write down this job number very quickly because I'm going to need it in a second. So if we hit save and finish, and if we get out of our job and we now come into our schedule, so there are different views in terms of schedule. So we were just in the quote and the scheduling is exactly the same if you're in the job itself. But you can schedule this way as well through the day view, week view, or month view. So if I come in here, we've got the job drop down. So we can toggle between job, quote, or activity, depending on what we're trying to schedule. And then in our search jobs, we can change the stage if we need to just look for certain jobs. But if we're not sure, and if we know the job number, we can search for it here or by searching for the customer name. We can select the job and we can schedule on this view as well. So I know I've already scheduled it for today, but I'm going to schedule another block for later on, and then I can click and drag. So we can schedule here. I find this way easier if it is maybe a longer term job. If it is just I'm going to say a basic kind of call out, it's just a service call. Sometimes if you're already in the job and because we're creating it and pricing it, etc., that could be easier. But if it is a longer term job or the job already exists, I find this way easier personally. And the reason for that is once I've put in one block, if we right click on the colored block, we have a lot of schedule options to work with here. So if I put it on the wrong person, or maybe someone's sick and I need to reschedule it to someone else for today, we can cut and paste or copy and paste schedules between people. So if I cut it, I can then paste it onto Bob Plumber. I now have an overlap. So if you do ever see this line, I call it the candy cane, it just means that there's an overlap. The system's alerting us that there's a conflict, and I guess ideally in a perfect world, people can't be in two places at once. So it's telling us that we should rectify that. So I can cut and paste it back, or we can copy it. If we don't want to cut it completely, we can remove it. If it is a longer term job, I really like the recur schedule feature. So if I click on recur, what it's going to do is it's going to ask me how often, so daily, weekly, monthly, yearly, whether it's every day or whether it's once a month, and end date. So this can be really helpful if you do, say, have a job for a week, a month, even longer. So you don't have to click and drag for each person for each day for that time. We could schedule it once for this technician and go daily and every day until, and I'm just going to put next week. And what it's going to do is now if I come to tomorrow and next week, it's automatically scheduled that job for me for that long-term period. And if we did need to adjust it and
move it later on if we needed to reschedule a certain technician or they're sick or anything like that, we can still adjust it, but we don't have to. So that is very helpful. If we do need to edit schedule notes or schedule rate or anything like that, we want to look at the job card. So if the technician has completed a job for today from the mobile app, there would be a little lock icon in the top right-hand corner of the schedule block to tell us that it's been completed. Now, if you wanted to look at the job card for any reason, I find this the easiest way to navigate into it. Right-click on the schedule block, come down to job card, view job card, and that way I can then click straight into it and it's going to show me if they had completed it from the mobile app, any notes that they'd filled out, materials that they'd selected, and if they'd have geo timestamps based on hitting start work, stop work, anything like that. I can see all of that in here on the map. So another scenario in terms of scheduling that I see come up quite often is someone's sick, something happens, we need to shuffle things at the very last minute. So while we have these right-click options on the individual schedule blocks, and they are helpful, if you do need to move someone's whole day, I do find this move schedules button easier, or on the 3 dots next to the technician's name, we can go copy schedules or move schedules within here as well. So if I wanted to say move schedules, we can either just move it from me to me onto a different day, so we could push it out, or if we needed to, if it was a more urgent job and we needed someone else to do it, we can click on the blue text, change it to whoever we need to send it to, and then select the new schedule date. So if I just wanted to reschedule today's jobs to Sandy, I can, or if I wanted to push out my jobs to another day, I can do that as well. And then if I hit move, it's now moved all of that directly onto Sandy. So there is quite a lot of power in the schedule in terms of different scenarios that come up depending on how you want to handle that. I'm just going to take a quick pause here and check the chat. Is there any questions or so far around anything that we've covered or the scheduling or anything like that? Okay, we'll keep moving then. So from here, I'm going to come back into my job. It was not in pending, but that's okay. So I'm going to open up my job that I was just in. We've got all of our schedules here now on the right-hand side in the activity timeline, which is helpful. So if they did submit anything from site, we could see their notes and times and things like that in the activity timeline as well. But let's pretend that the customer has come back and said the job's all done, we're all finished, we're happy to invoice it now. We can hit save and finish, invoice job, or you can, from the progress jobs table view, you can hit options invoice job through there as well. So again, it comes down to what you're in or what you're looking at in the navigation. But once we've come in here, we've got our invoice screen. So you can, it does default to tax invoice, but if for any reason you need to change the invoice type, whether that's to a progress claim, deposit, or request for claim, you can do that in the top right-hand corner here. And depending on what you select, it will change the fields accordingly. So if I change it back to tax invoice, now because I changed the payment terms earlier on the customer card, it's automatically picked up my 14 days from invoice date instead of my 7 days. It's pulled through the invoice comment from the job description. So if it is a quoted job, the description is going to come from the original quote. So it's whatever you put on the original quote will flow through to the job, and then from the job to the invoice. It is a text field, so if you need to override it for any reason or add any additional information, you can, but it does flow through if you're ever wondering where that's coming from. If I keep scrolling down, it's giving me all of the breakdown of that pricing. and the additional invoice footnote settings based on the system setup. So if I hit finish, and I don't think I did put in an invoice template, so this must be the system default, but we can change it here if we need to, and we can now email this off. So because I put in the accounts email as the primary contact for invoices and statements earlier, it has pre-populated that email address here as well. If there were additional contacts that we wanted to add, we can click into this box and any additional email addresses that are linked to this customer will appear to include, but it will, whoever's ticked as the primary will auto-populate. So I'm going to change that actually, because just in case that is a real email, I'll swap that over and we can send that off. Wonderful. So that's kind of the gist of what I wanted to go over today in terms of a basic kind of workflow for someone that's maybe newer to the system, going over some of those really fundamental things like setting up customer cards and employees correctly, and then creating a quote and following that through. Some of the other things that I'd like to point out in terms of resources that are available to you if you do have new staff. If I come to the question mark icon in the top right-hand corner, there are some really great resources that are free through SimPro. So they're not laser resources, but they are free if you want to use them. So there is a walk me through, if we click this, a little pop-up, and they're little interactive videos that you can watch without even leaving LaserPro, which is helpful. If we've got the help guide, so if I click this open, the help guide is very beneficial. I like to call it the Google for SimPro. So I come in here, and if I know what I'm looking for, so say I have something specific about quotes that I'm looking at, I can search the word quotes and all the quote related articles will come up for me to look into. So I do find it helpful. The only thing I would say is that sometimes it is quite wordy. So if you're ever not sure, so let's say I go into quotes and how to create a service quote. So we've got all of these different sections here, and if I pop them all out, there is quite a lot of text here. So sometimes it can be a bit overwhelming. That's just my advice or my take on it. So if I know what I'm looking for, I find that control find and just put in a keyword to then take me to what I'm looking for. That's just a bit of a hack that I use, just because there is so much information within the same page. So do with that information what you will, but that's my recommendation. If I come back to LaserPro and I come back to my question mark icon, we do also have a learning toolbox. So this can be really helpful as well for new staff members because it is modular-based learning. So you could register for this. Now, you do have to register and then SimPro will send you back your an email to log in just because I have to verify that you're a customer. So you can't go into it straight away, but it is modular-based learning. So if you do have a new staff member and maybe you want them to do some kind of self-learning for a little bit and get up to speed with some of the areas of the system, I do probably recommend that you register them for something like this, just to help them at that foundational level, as much as they, hopefully will have access to a recording to this today. There's so many resources and they're free, so why wouldn't we take advantage of those? So that's that link. And if we come back, we have a contact support button as well. So if you do have any issues or questions in the system that you want to report to SimPro support, you can contact them through here. So you can contact them either through phone, email, or live chat. If you do want to chat with them, it's down the bottom here in the top bottom right-hand corner. I believe off the top of my head, they're open 24/6 now. Because they are across time zones. So if you do have any system related questions or issues, obviously you do have your BPMs available, but if it's something that's maybe more time sensitive, please reach out to SimPro.
If we come back, there is a link as well to the SimPro Ideas portal. So this is the portal where people suggest new functions, new features or functionality to SimPro, and they do review that in terms of what they will develop in the future. So there are quite a lot of resources within this question mark icon. And the bottom one is keyboard shortcuts. So this is really helpful, actually. I don't use all of these, but there are certain ones that if I'm doing the same action a lot throughout the day, if you do familiarize yourself with even one or two of these, maybe that might be a bit of a time saver for you. So that can be helpful as well, and you can print it out. So if you do want to maybe print it out and put it up in the office for everyone to refer to, you can do that. So they are some really handy resources, and I do encourage you to take advantage of them where you can. I'm not familiar with the LaserNZ intranet, so maybe there's some great functions in that as well, or great resources in there. I don't have access to it, so I can't speak to that today. But in terms of SimPro resources, please do have a look. It is really great, and I do put a lot of effort in upkeeping them as well. So we're nearing the end of the session today, so I might stop there and open it up for Q&A time. If anyone does have any questions, please feel free to unmute yourself or pop it in the chat. I've allowed about 10 minutes or so. If we don't end up having a lot of questions, that's okay. I will let you get on with your day.
Caitlin, just in regards to overriding the labour rate in the customer card, if you then go and change the system labour rate and hit update, does that then override that labour rate in the customer card?
So if you have a customer specific labour rate set up and then you come in here and change, say, the default, it depends on what setting you change here. So it says update changes to all customers with the current rate. So say $75 is the current rate. Because I've changed my customer card to 65, it's going to exclude the 65 if I left it as this setting. It's only going to update anyone that is currently on 75. So it's not going to override any that we've already gone in and changed. The only time it will override ones that we've already changed is if we change the toggle to all customers. Then it will override absolutely everyone that's in the system as a customer. So there is a bit of nuance there, and it depends on what setting you apply. But yeah, I think some people don't understand that, and sometimes maybe click the wrong thing and then override what they're not meant to. So that is something to be aware of. You can override them. Just be mindful when you are updating them as to what you're doing, so we're not undoing that hard work that we've just done. We do have a question. Turn off notifications for customers under customer file now. Let's turn off that particular customer getting the customer radar survey for those that have customer radar set up. I don't know what customer radar is. I haven't heard that term before. Is that like a NPS type survey, Ron?
Yeah, yes. It goes out.
I don't believe so. That's not going to stop that. From what I know, based on how Australia's is set up, that's not sent through LaserPro directly. It's actually sent through a third-party system. So it won't stop customer radar, from what I know. It will only stop them getting LaserPro specific notifications. So any kind of emails or anything like that. You have it set up.
Yeah. So there was a workaround where if you didn't want a customer to receive the notification, you had to remove the email address out of their customer card, I think it was.
Yes, because the data for customer radar is taken out of LaserPro based on that it's, well, from Australia anyway, that it's an individual customer, that they have an email address populated. So there are certain parameters that it's looking for.
But you can also make those notifications now cost center specific. and or job type specific as well. So
Yes, if it's a LaserPro notification, you can make it cost center or tag or something like that specific, but
Yeah.
I don't believe that will stop customer radar.
Caitlin,
depending on how you set up the job.
customer radar, beg your pardon, our customer radar is a notification.
Oh,
in
it is a
LaserPro.
notification?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. In that case,
Sorry.
if it is a notification through LaserPro, then you turning it off will stop that as well. It's going to stop all notifications to that customer in LaserPro. Apologies, some nuances between Australia and New Zealand there, but thank you for clarifying. Do we have any additional questions?
There was one there about running a report on who
Yeah, I was
uses
just
labour
saying,
rate.
Caitlin, so because
Oh,
obviously when
sorry,
you fix,
I missed that, Neil. Apologies, I missed your chat, but thanks for jumping on.
no, it's just that obviously if you're fixing or locking a customer's labour rate, it can be a bit dangerous if the market moves over a few year period. So can you run a report to see who's got their labour rates fixed?
There is no report for that, no. I'm trying to think off the top of my head if there's a way around that. Let me check that for you, because I know I've heard other people complain about that in the past, that they override it and then they can't kind of see, like you said, for then, you know, if the market changes. And then they forget to update it, or they miss a customer getting updated and then they're still on old pricing. So let me check if, I don't believe there's a report for that, but let me see if I can find another way around that for you, whether that's through my mind's going to, can we export the customer list and see who's on what rates? Let me check that for you though. I just want to verify before I give you advice on that. So I'll let Ron know the outcome of that, if that's okay. I'll let Ron and Sandy know, and they can pass it along.
I've got one other admin-y question, but I'll just wait till the others jump off.
Okay, that's fine. If I scroll back to the bottom, order numbers, is there a way to put multiple order numbers within one job or project, e.g. with a variation? In terms of the order number, that sits within the settings tab of a job. So you can only have one per job, so to speak. If it is a variation, if the customer wants the variation to be on a separate order number, then I would create it as a linked variation, just so that way you can list the order number on that separate invoice. So it's still a variation and it links back to the original job, but it would be its own SimPro job number to then put in the separate order number for it to then display on the invoice. Yes, SimPro would change it to only one order number. Project often need multiple order numbers. I think it's just a bit of a system limitation at the moment. I do think that's a fair point though, and that it is probably quite a common scenario that comes up. So I do think it's something that we could report back to SimPro and give feedback on. But at this point in time, the way the order number works within the settings tab of a job is limited. But I will make a note of that because I do talk to SimPro often, so we can pass that along. Sorry, I'm just writing a note. If there are any more questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. Otherwise, thank you all for joining today. If you have been using LaserPro for a while, hopefully you got something out of it, even if it's just a few small tidbits to make your life easier. But if you are newer to the system, hopefully you learnt quite a lot.
Thanks, Caitlin. And just a reminder that we will be putting the recording of this webinar up onto the intranet in due course.
Yes, I will endeavour to get the recording over to Ron whenever it becomes available. It's quite a long recording. So hopefully later today, it should be hopefully up on the internet, maybe next week.